welcome to our fall masterclass for the New Professionals Graduate Students Knowledge Community for NASPA 4 East Region. I'm Gina Lee Olakoya. I serve as the masterclass coordinator, and I'm excited that you're with us today as we get started with our fall and spring masterclass options for our knowledge community members. Before we get started, I'd like to just do a little bit of housekeeping. If you are on into our channel here, you'll be able to, on the side, type in the questions that you have. And if you want to do that periodically throughout today's conversation, or if you want to wait to the end and do that, you certainly can, so that we can get all of your answers addressed throughout the masterclass today. Additionally, if you haven't already noticed, on our web page, on our Facebook page, we have put some information out about if you're interested in volunteering in NASPA, great ways that you can get involved with NASPA, and one of those ways is for you to submit an application to be one of the chairs or co-chairs for the NASPA New Professionals Graduate Students Knowledge Community. So please check that out so you have an opportunity to get involved and engage. If that's something that you're interested in, and we hope that you do. As part of your growth in the field, and getting to be a part of this knowledge community is great, but any other knowledge community that you may have an interest in as well is certainly going to be helpful for your own professional development. So those are a few things around housekeeping to get us started today. So our session today, our masterclass today, is really all about what do you do again, the phrase that is, charting your path in student affairs. Because every time I'm sure that you come across family members, they've asked you, tell me, what do you do again exactly? And today we are here to kind of help you unpack that for them, help you to learn a little bit more about ways you can navigate your career and start charting your path in your career field here in student affairs. So please welcome our speaker today, who is Romy Daylor. I always mispronounce Romy's last name. Pronouns are they, them, she, her. Is currently a 6-month employee in our program as a program advisor at the Illini Union Board at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. Their interests within higher education include student activities, orientation and retention, LGBTQ issues and inclusion, and equity work. Romy previously served as a graduate advisor within the Center for Student Involvement at the University of South Florida, the Tampa campus, and as a visiting intern for new student and sophomore programs at Southern Connecticut State University. Romy has a master's in education and curriculum instruction, college student affairs from the University of South Florida, and a BA from music from McAllister College in St. Paul, Minnesota. So welcome, Romy, to our conversation, who will take us through at this time.
Yes, awesome. Hello, everyone. As Gina mentioned, my name is Romy. I'm very excited to be with all of you today. I do have a few slides for us. So pretty excited to kind of share some topics, conversations around kind of what we do, how we explain that to folks, how we engage with that too within our own self-discovery. And so I am super excited to share all that with you. I kind of wanted to expound on myself and my history a little bit. First and foremost, why I do what I do, it all is all about my history, right? It's all about where I've come from. It's all about who's gotten me here. And it's all about what I've been able to do thus far, now as a new professional in the field of student affairs. And so obviously, I would not be here today without student affairs professionals, like probably many of us. I planned on dropping out or transferring to a much less academically intense institution multiple times as an undergrad. But all of those experiences led me to student affairs professionals, like the former dean of students at McAllister, a couple other folks got me involved in orientation and programming, and that just really led me to my passion. It really led me to understand that if you know, as someone who enjoys helping others, as someone who enjoys, you know, seeing others succeed, that this was an opportunity to do that. And that this field is an opportunity to really help craft and shape the lives of, you know, many people who are going to go on and do some big things, do important things, all of that sort of stuff. And so I'm really excited to, you know, be in that position now. Obviously, I got to do some learning in graduate school at the University of South Florida. I'm very grateful. I went from a very small undergrad of about 2,000 students to a graduate school with close to 50,000 students. It used to be a system, but Florida law just changed and they made it one institution. So now it's one institution with multiple campuses. And I have about 50,000 students in the system. And so it's a very big jump. I had a huge learning curve, but I think I just like talking about it because it really gave me a really good understanding of what I appreciated in my work, what I appreciated in the space that I was in. And so I'm really grateful I made that decision. I'm really grateful to all the great mentors and people and supervisors and everyone I met in Tampa. It was a really, really wonderful experience. I think one thing that's really interesting for me, particularly related to this topic, after I graduated from grad school in 2017, so it's now been about 1.5 years since I graduated. So I'm going to explain this, a little complicated, but I submitted in my entire job search post-master's degree, I submitted my first application on March 14th, 2017. You know, just like everyone, around kind of spring break time, I finally kicked it into gear and started searching for jobs, finding things to apply to. And that's when I started my search. I did not get offered and accept the position I currently hold at Illinois until March 13th, 2018. And so between the first application I ever submitted and my actual acceptance of my job, it was about it was almost a full year. It was one day under a full year. And that really made me need to explore, understand who I was as a person, what I wanted. If you decide to connect with me via LinkedIn later, I posted an article about this experience kind of right after I moved to Illinois. And one thing that I talked about, one thing that people talk a lot about as a new professional, even as we're, you know, thinking about the future, like what are some of our non-negotiables, right? Everyone has non-negotiables. And unfortunately, just due to my circumstances, I really had to pare that list down. As someone who identifies outside of the gender binary, I was very conscious of that. I definitely needed to be aware of that, considering our current political climate then and now. And I, you know, by the time I ended up kind of doing the whole like on-campus final interview stuff like that with Illinois, the only non-negotiable really on my list was that I needed to be in a state that had some, you know, decent level of non-discrimination policies. And that was my main focus. And I feel lucky to end up in a state like Illinois that does value that in a lot of ways. You know, and it has some of those rules on the books. And so it definitely made that transition a little more easy once I came into my position. So that's just a little about me, how this all kind of came about. I've done a lot of soul searching around these topics, and so I'm really excited to share some of the thoughts I have with you. So the next thing that kind of first and foremost is kind of explaining what we do. I think this is, you know, the great place of where we start, how we talk to people. I'm sure most of you, when you're having conversations with your family members, you know, your friends, that might not necessarily have been exposed to student affairs as you were. It's really kind of hard to explain and in an easy manner. The way that, you know, I'm in a student activities role, and so the way that I kind of describe it is I usually just tell people that I help students like plan the fun stuff that they get to do in the student center, like the student union. Most of the time that works. Most of the time people understand that, like, you know, stuff happens outside of the classroom and someone's got to help the students plan it. And they kind of get it, but obviously that's very surface level, right? Like that doesn't necessarily describe everything that we do. And so I think when you're ready to have maybe that deeper conversation, or when you're ready to explore that topic a little further with someone you know, I think some of the points that we can focus on, one that Gina actually brought up when her and I were discussing this presentation, was the idea of a student development educator. So first and foremost, we're here to help students develop. You know, we are here to make sure that they feel that they gained something from the experience that they have with us. And obviously this development occurs both inside and outside of the classroom. But we're there in whatever role we serve as a student affairs practitioner, that, you know, we're there to help students understand their purpose as a student and their goals post-graduation. And so, you know, we're really kind of people that they can lean on, that we have that experience, we have that knowledge, we have that training, where we can offer, you know, true structured advice. Obviously, it's very different from maybe something more along the lines of like, you know, a quote unquote professional career coach, or, you know, obviously with some more personal issues, we can offer as much advice as possible. But to some extent, that obviously veers more towards into mental health education and mental health programming, which some of you may do. But for the most part, that's not necessarily what we're trying to do on a day-to-day basis within the development. That said, we're constantly doing that, and that leads to those kind of aha light bulb moments. You know, that's those moments happen all the time. You know, as a student in student activities in particular, for me, you know, having the conversations with students as we're planning our events, and then saying like, you know, we were just talking and we kind of just bring up a question and we're like, well, how is this going to work? Or how is this going to impact the students? And it all kind of clicks, right? And they say, oh, like if we do this at this activity, they'll be able to gain something in a different way than I had hoped for. And that's some like kind of a basic light bulb moment that I get to have in student activities. I definitely think that those exist in a lot of in a huge variety of ways for us across this field. One thing that I think all of us definitely do, I think some do more intensely than others, is community building and upholding standards. So at most campuses, I will not speak for all, but at least at the campuses I've been a part of, all of the people that are doing the direct community building, the direct standard establishment, the people who have the main stake in that tend to be student affairs professionals. And so, you know, whether that's through, you know, your conduct office, whether that's through maybe a dean of student center, obviously that happens a lot in housing and residential life. I think as student affairs practitioners, we have this really unique opportunity where students are here to learn, right? And they're here to be educated, and they're here to learn about not only, you know, whatever they're going to be, you know, as an adult, quote unquote. They're also learning how to be active and engaged members of society. And so, you know, because we spend so much time with them outside of the classroom, I don't know the exact numbers off the top of my head, but I know it's this huge percentage that they actually spend outside of the classroom. That's our area of expertise, right? Like that's the area where we can say things and do things and create intentional community. I think what's really important about that though is that, so all communities have expectations, and we're usually the ones that, you know, write those and enforce those, like I've mentioned. But I think what's really necessary is that we're creating spaces where everyone can learn, and we're creating spaces where everyone can grow. And so that's a very fine line to navigate. It's a very complicated line to navigate. To some extent, I can't even imagine how some of the folks in the more conduct-based roles do that, beyond the knowledge that I have from my friends who are currently in those roles as professionals and grad students. But it's you know, there is no single person coming to college, right? There's no single person coming to our campus. Obviously, every campus kind of has an overall culture. Every campus has an overall, you know, kind of idea behind it. I definitely think when in my undergrad, if you know anything about Macalester College, Macalester College is a small private liberal arts college. Take rankings for what you will, but our ranking definitely indicate that that institution is very left-leaning politically, is very politically engaged, and definitely focuses a lot of its efforts to make sure students are involved in the community in that way. And so, there's constantly conversation around how are we doing, how is that community, even as an alum of that institution, I'm still a part of, conversations of how do we navigate that where all students feel welcome in this space, and that everyone is challenged in some way, shape, or form so that they're able to grow. And that no one's idea or no one's, general consensus is necessarily like, it doesn't go unchecked, right? Like that there's actually some dialogue behind it, right? It needs to be productive. It needs to be done in a way that allows for growth and without. Well, one thing when you think about community building and standards, particularly as student affairs professionals, obviously a lot of people will question us as a field about why there isn't necessarily more, I would say, the word that comes to my mind is punitive punishment. And I don't know if that's necessarily our role. That can be a whole nother conversation. I'm just bringing it up in the context of what I'm talking about right now. But I think it is necessary, of course. There are certain instances where that is absolutely necessary. But I also think that this is, as someone, we've all gone through college, right? We've all experienced college in some way, shape, or form as student affairs professionals. And I think we all know that to just kind of, it's one thing to stop things and educate and help communities grow and all of that sort of stuff. But it's another thing to say like, hey, like that's completely unacceptable. We're not even going to help you understand why, right? I think that there's a time and a place for that, but I don't necessarily know if that's within our, what we should be doing as professionals. Please feel free to agree or please feel free to disagree with me on that. That's just kind of where I'm at in my processing of that issue. With all that in mind, that's kind of like three maybe like main points that I can think of off the top of my head that Gina and I talked about. Feel free to like drop in the comments, like continue this on the Facebook group page about like maybe the way that you explain how you do, what's kind of your surface level explanation. In the business world, they probably would call it like your elevator pitch, your 30-second elevator pitch. I would love to hear more examples of it. I'm sure other people would too. It's different for everyone, but never hurts to kind of adapt and grow as we do new things and as we learn new things in our field. With that in mind, I think I'm a person who is very focused on personal growth, personal understanding, someone who definitely wants to take their time to understand what I do, how I do it. And I think that's really critical into that conversation about what we do. I don't think we should necessarily, I think there are ways to have that conversation like we were just talking about that's maybe a little bit more straightforward. But I also think that it's really important that we know and we are engaged in what we do before we necessarily have that conversation about what we do and all of those pieces. And so kind of the topics I'm going to talk about, I've kind of come up with like my 4 Fs. They're all kind of focused on, they all start with the word finding. So my 4 Fs, like finding fit, finding purpose, finding the sense, kind of the sense of what you're doing, and finding the future. As grad students and new professionals, we're constantly told that, you should get a position, you should give it as much effort as you can. In some ways, a lot of people will still tell us that we should do our best to stay for 2 or 3 school years if we're able to in our first role. But obviously that's not always perfect for everyone, and that doesn't always necessarily work out. But it is a piece of advice that I definitely was still given only a couple of years ago. So I'm sure others are still being given that information right now as well. I'm going to have the word physical. I have the phrase physical representation at the bottom of this slide. I wrote physical representation in a way that I think when we're doing any of this work, when we're doing any of the work to explore what we do, explaining how we do it, all of that sort of stuff, I think it's really important to have some sort of visual, quote unquote, physical representation of what we're talking about. And so whether that means you keep a journal on this, whether that means you write a blog, which I guess is a virtual journal, but nonetheless, or maybe you're the kind of person who is an out loud processor. I'm an out loud processor, and so I definitely enjoy having those types of conversations with folks, but I really enjoy doing it over maybe like Facebook Messenger or Google Chat or text message, because it allows me to go back and read what I wrote, and it allows me to go back to read what I was thinking about and how I was thinking about it in that time and place. And so I think that having some sort of physical representation of these topics, these ideas as you do the processing can be important and helpful. So the first two were kind of finding fit and finding purpose. And those are kind of like, I think, like the first steps in kind of exploring what this all means and exploring how we're able to have this conversation with people. And so first and foremost, obviously, when you're finding a fit, you have to define it, right? And so I went to dictionary.com and I Googled, or I typed in and searched fit to see what their definition was. And the first definition that came up was adapted, suited, and or appropriate. I think that, kind of is the most basic version of what fit means in the dictionary. I think for me, as a, for my definition, I think in some ways, like, that's correct. I definitely think you want to find a place that you can adapt to and that you're suited for. But what I really think is important to add in this conversation around fit is the student affairs tends to be a really emotionally demanding field. We put a lot of our own personal, effort and souls, if you believe in that concept, personalities, all of that sort of stuff into this work. And so I would never, ever, ever want someone to be in a place where they don't feel 100% of their full person, whatever that means to them. I think I knew that, being a trans-identified person, that I would want to be in a space that I was comfortable. I wanted to be in a space where I could feel supported. And so I think that's really critical. When you're thinking about fit and you're thinking about what type of work you're going to do and how you're going to do it, it's really important to feel confident that if you need support, when you are lacking it or you need it, or you feel that you've just given too much of yourself and you need to kind of recharge, you want to be in a place and you want to be at an institution that gives that to you. I think that for the most part, I think that 6 months is still not a long time, but in my 6 months, I definitely feel that has occurred overall for me here at Illinois. We're at the main campus in Urbana-Champaign. I think the next really critical thing about kind of engaging what we do and talking about it is finding the purpose. So once we're in that first role, once we're, we got the job, we're there, we're kind of trying to make it into something. Obviously, I'm going to be real. I don't love networking. I'm very much a person's person. I really like to get to know people. I really like to get to know about you. I really like to take the time to understand what you're saying. And that's not necessarily always possible in networking. That said, I definitely think there are ways you can do that and still engage maybe on a little bit of a deeper level. One of the first things I did when I got to my campus, to Illinois, I talked to my colleague at the time, and she was like, here are all of the people that I can think of that you would probably want to talk to. You're probably going to get something from, definitely going to help you understand the way that you can support the greater campus community. And so I did that. I met here at Illinois, we have identity-based cultural centers. We don't necessarily have one multicultural center space. Most of those identity groups have their own spaces on campus, but I met with a lot of those folks to kind of understand the way that that works here. I took the time to ask them about maybe what we could do to be partners as kind of the general programming body, taking advantage of other professional development experiences. I was right away when I got here, I was given the opportunity to go to a couple conferences. One was through, I do work in a union and I am a part of the union staff. And so I was offered to go to a new professionals orientation for union employees through ACUI, which is the union organization, similar to things like NASPA. And that was a really great experience. I got to meet a lot of people. It got me to kind of re-understand the way that I do student activities within the context of being an employee of a union, which was something I had never done before. I also then immediately, actually the week after, I went to a social justice educational development conference on campus through our kind of overarching umbrella of those identity centers. And that was a really great experience as well. I got to meet a lot of people who are interested in those topics across campus from all different walks of life. And that was a really good experience to see those people and have those conversations. I also got offered to do things like this. As soon as we came back this school year, Gina asked me if I was interested in doing something like this. And I said, why not? And here we are. I also recently got to help a student present at the NACA Regional Conference, which is the biggest organization for campus activities. And in a week or so, I get to do another presentation on identity and what identity means to me through our LGBT Resource Center here on campus. So I think when I'm talking about purpose and I'm talking about finding our purpose, I think it's really about taking those opportunities and those advantages that are given to you and you're able to develop from, right? It's not necessarily even about just building the resume, right? It's about being able to say like, hey, like I took this opportunity, even if it doesn't go spectacularly well, it's still going to help you grow and it's still going to help you better understand what you do. And it's going to allow you to be able to refine the conversation you have with people who don't necessarily get it. Like, maybe don't still quite understand what we're doing as student affairs professionals. So the other two F's that I have here, the first one is finding the sense. So it's kind of finding the sense in what all of this means to you. I think this is critical to being able to talk about what you do, to being able to understand what you do. Obviously, this is probably one of the least, I'd say this is probably the least easy of the four that I was talking about. Because every day something new is going to happen. Every day something's going to happen. I think this is really, as I have on the slide, it's really where the outside factors come into play. And so it's your outside factors like your friends, your family, your social situations, but obviously it's also, the greater culture. What sort of dialogues are, is the greater city that you live in trying to engage in? What is your state really focused on? What is happening nationally that's really important to students on campus and to the work that you do with those students? That it takes a long time. I definitely think that 6 months in, I don't know if I could really give you a strong, I could dabble, I could, give you a couple bullet points, but I don't know if I could really engage in this conversation quite yet. And so it definitely takes time. And I think it's really critically, you need to let that time exist and happen. You can't rush. This is one of the biggest things that you can't really rush. It's one of the biggest things that you're going to constantly need to develop. obviously you're always changing as a person, and what you need in terms of fit is always going to shift and change, but usually your core values don't necessarily change, right? And so that still kind of stays, there's still some constant in finding your fit. I think when it comes to finding the sense of what you do, and being able to engage in it and explain it, that's always going to change. I think to some extent there are still some core tenets to it. Of course, there always are. We are, as human individuals, we have kind of core tenets that lead us, core principles. But I think that because this is the stuff that we really can't control too much. This is where it gets really kind of dicey and something that you really need to pay attention to and really explore. So take your time. Do not rush it. I tried to rush it. I got here in April, and I, April in student affairs at any institution is a bit of a very busy month. And so I didn't necessarily have a lot of the time to process in that way. And then it became summer. And as we are a college town here in Champaign-Urbana, we lose a lot of our population, and so a lot of the buzz around the community isn't necessarily there in the summertime, and that's when I tried to do a lot of this work, and it wasn't the right time. And in hindsight, I'm able to say that. In the moment, I definitely was not thinking that way, but I think there also is a right time and place to do this type of exploration, I guess is what I'm trying to get at. And I think you need to be very cognizant of what that means and when that looks right for you. Because obviously if you're in orientation or to some extent, if you're doing conference housing through, in a housing department or a residential life department, obviously your summers look very different than me as a student activities professional. And so that time, like your downtime where you think you have all this time to think and really dig in, maybe it's not the best time. Maybe it's, you just need to carve it out in different ways. With all of this in mind, I think as new professionals and grad students, we're always thinking about our future. We're always thinking about what our next step might be, what our goals could be. I think that's where finding your purpose and engaging your network really comes into play. Being able to say what you want to see yourself doing is really important. And so I think that's another piece of this that allows you to understand what you do on an individual level. But I think it also provides then a picture for other folks, that might have a different idea of what you want to do or where you want to go with all of this. And so, as new professionals and grad students, I think one thing that we think about a lot is if we want to get another degree, if we want to get an advanced degree, a PhD, an EDD, some form of a doctorate. Maybe if you get into a space like mine where I'm doing union work, if I wanted to stay in a union work, I probably need a little bit more of a business background, maybe a little bit more, some facilities management pieces that I wouldn't necessarily get as a grad student unless I was a facilities graduate assistant. And so this is where it kind of comes into play. And I think this is why I mentioned at the beginning why writing the stuff down in some way, shape, or form, or putting it into actual text or pictures, however you want to visualize it, however you're able to visualize it. I think that this in particular is really where you're really going to feel a lot of help from that visualization. It's going to allow you to, maybe you're a person who likes a vision board. Maybe you're a person who, wants to create, I'm sure there's someone out there who likes to create a virtual vision board with memes or, something funny like that. But whatever helps you put this down into like concrete evidence of some sort, if you will. I think that really helps you focus to know what you do. But again, getting back to that bigger topic that we've been talking about helping others understand what we do. I think, as I started explaining student affairs to my mom, actually, this is a little background on me again, but my mom actually has a lot of knowledge around student affairs. Long story, but she didn't finish college when she was originally there. She went back 30 years later. Student affairs was very different by the time she went back. And it was mostly student affairs professionals helping her finish that degree and then be able to get her teaching license in special education. So she had a good grasp of what that looked like, but my dad really didn't. And so one thing that I found really helpful in having this conversation with my dad was when I first started having this conversation with him, I didn't have this, laid out with that 4 Fs of the finding, or anything like that per se. But I was able to focus on the idea of student development, and then I was able to focus on why I'm doing this and what I want to see myself do with it. And I think that's really what I've broken down. Hopefully, that's what I think other folks have seen through these slides and through the conversation I've been having here. That has been kind of my bread and butter when it comes to helping people understand what I do. Obviously, it gets a little more complicated when you're discussing this with folks who may not necessarily be exposed to higher education. I definitely have, I'm one of like 35, 36 cousins on one side of my family, and there's like 5 cousins younger than me, so I'm pretty young compared to the rest of my extended family. And I was the second person to enter college and get a bachelor's degree out of my entire extended family. And so, besides my mother, but this is all on my father's side. So, having the conversation with them about what I do is still tricky. It's still not necessarily something I'm able to do in a way where they they get it. I think I'm able to help them understand. I think I'm able to help them grasp the work that we do and why it's important, particularly as we live in a culture that really stresses higher education. Even if higher education, even if maybe traditional higher education in particular is not necessarily what's best for that individual, we have a lot of those folks on our campuses. We have a lot of folks in the 2-year colleges that I'm sure some folks work at. There are a lot of other institutions, and it's as a student affairs professional, it's really important for us to understand all of that and kind of the greater landscape of higher education, because I guess I didn't write that down here, but I do think that's really important. I think that understanding the wider landscape, the options that are available for people, what's possible with varying types of educational opportunities, I think that's really important to being able to have this conversation as well. And so I would recommend making sure that you stay up to date with some of those pieces, those news pieces, whether that's through things like Inside Higher Ed, the Chronicle of Higher Ed, news sites like that, or if it's even just, you meet friends at conferences, you have colleagues from grad school, you have your other colleagues that you might have just met as a new professional or, as a grad student, really having those conversations with those people and being able to build your knowledge base about what higher education looks like in this country in particular, or in wherever location you are located, depending, Canada, abroad, etc. I think that understanding that time and space and what's happening in your local area, particularly around higher education, is critical. And so I definitely recommend doing that work as well. So that is that's kind of where I feel is the good natural endpoint. I think that these are really, so I'll scroll up again. I think that having those focus points about being a student development educator, having what all these the light bulb moments that you're able to provide for students. Obviously community building and upholding standards is very crucial to a lot of the work that we do in student affairs. So those are kind of things you definitely can focus on as you're having that more general conversation about what we do. But then, of course, you need to know how to engage what you do and engage what we do as student affairs professionals. And so making sure you understand your fit, making sure you understand your purpose within your position, and then finding the sense and finding the future. I think that all of that is pretty critical. And then, of course, keeping up to date with higher education in your local communities, whatever country you might be located in, things of that nature. So we definitely have a question here. You definitely can contact me as well. Social media, totally willing. You can email me, feel free. The question that we have here in the chat screen is, the question is, how do you go about planning for your next job? So that's a great question, and definitely people, if anyone wants to add to this via the chat screen or continue this conversation later, feel free. I think for me, when it comes to thinking about my next job, I mean, not gonna lie, I definitely have thought about it. I think that's the culture that at least I have experienced thus far. I think it's never, a bad thing to consider what's next. I think obviously it really depends on what you're looking for. It really depends on what you're willing to do. Obviously, within my first, there's a further question about prioritizing the positions that you wanted to apply for, and I think they're both really related. I think that it's really about what you want to do, where you want to be, and what your limits are. So when I was applying for positions, when my list of non-negotiables for my next job was long, or for my first job, I guess I should say, I was only applying to student activities positions, and I was only applying in states that I thought I would feel comfortable in. So for my personal story, that's what I chose to do. As my search went on, and I dropped a lot of my non-negotiables, I kind of just applied for everything. I ended up applying and interviewing for a lot of residential life positions, though I actually have no rest life experience beyond being at a small school and learning everything that happens behind the scenes. But nonetheless, that's where we were. And that is, I think what's really important though is making sure that when you're working through your list of what your non-negotiables are, what your desires are, you can rank them, and you should rank them. I really wanted to do either student activities or orientation. Like those are the two jobs I wanted to do. And so that's why I focused on those types of positions when I was applying to them, or when I was doing my application process. I think I've really enjoyed my experience thus far in my student activities based role. And so, pondering the future, I definitely don't think this necessarily is as present as it might be for other folks. I'm pretty cognizant that I'm probably going to focus on location next. Obviously, for kind of your first job search, if you're willing, someone's probably willing to take you. So particularly for U.S.-based folks, if you're willing to move across the country, someone's probably willing to help you get there. And so I think that you definitely should keep your options open location-wise. If you're able to do so. I think that when I do decide to move into my next search, I think that location is probably going to be the main driving factor for me. I think that I'm going to be a little bit more location bound, which can get complicated just because I'm probably going to be applying to locations outside of Urbana-Champaign. And so I recognize that, but I think that I know that even though I've really enjoyed my experience and I generally feel comfortable with what I have been given and what is available to me where I'm currently located, I think that I think I do want to live somewhere maybe a little bit bigger in terms of population. And so that's something that I'm really going to focus on next time. I think that within that, I'm still going to prioritize. I really enjoy student activities. I really enjoy student engagement. And so that's what I'm going to focus on. Obviously within student activities, I do a lot of event planning. And so I might expand a little bit maybe into more of the logistical facilities aspects of events. But that's kind of, me choosing to use my skills that I can apply elsewhere. So that's something that I'm probably gonna be looking at when I do that next search. Yeah, that's kind of my ideas that come to the top of my head off of that. With that in mind, I am not sure if there are any other questions. I am all I have. That was all of my content for you there within those slides I shared earlier. So, yeah. Does anyone have any final questions or thoughts that they want to share? Feel free to drop that. Okay, no more questions. Awesome. Well, thank you everyone so much. I really appreciated being given the chance to talk to y'all and all that jazz. So thanks for stopping in. I hope you guys gained even a little bit of information. Definitely feel free to follow up with me if you want to talk about it more one-on-one. I'm sure folks on, if you want to do it social media based, other people would be willing to do that too.
Thank you, Romy. Super. Thank you. We really appreciate the conversation today. Again, if there's any more questions that pop up, feel free to reach out to Romy, and I know he's going to be a fantastic resource. Again, thank you all for joining us today. Be on the lookout for our next program for the Knowledge Community Masterclass. And if you have any ideas or suggestions, feel free to shoot us an email or connect with us on Facebook as well. As if you are planning to attend the Region 4 East conference, be on the lookout for our Meet and Greet social for the new professional and graduate students knowledge community. Again, thank you so much. Have a super fantastic day. Truly appreciate your time.